Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of WCW's Road Wild 1999. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is Rey Mysterio teaming up with Billy Kidman and Eddie Guerrero versus Vampiro, Shaggy 2 Dope, and Violent J. I thought it was a good matchup. Rey, Kidman, and Guerrero all attacked Vampiro and Shaggy and Violent J. Mysterio, Kidman, and Guerrero were keeping the pace of the match, with Kidman ultimately hitting a shooting star press on Shaggy 2 Dope, pins for the 3. And your winners of the match are Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, and Eddie Guerrero. Hats off to Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, and Eddie Guerrero for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Tag Team Championships. It is Kanyon and Bam Bam Bigelow versus Harlem Heat. I thought this was a good match. Kanyon and Bigelow then attack Harlem Heat. Harlem Heat were trying to keep the pace up, keeping the pace of the match. Booker T then hits a missile drop kick on Bigelow, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Harlem Heat. Hats off to Harlem Heat for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, and Shane Douglas versus Curt Hennig, Barry Windham, and Bobby Duncum Jr. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Malenko, Saturn, and Douglas keeping the pace of the match. Saturn ends up hitting a Death Valley driver on Bobby Duncum, pins for the 3. And your winners of the match are Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, and Shane Douglas. Hats off to Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, and Shane Douglas for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Ernest Miller versus Bagwell. I thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Miller and Bagwell, with Miller keeping the pace of the match. Bagwell ultimately hits a roll-up on Ernest Miller, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Bagwell. Hats off to Bagwell for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the United States Championship. It is DDP versus Chris Benoit in a no disqualification match. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between DDP and Benoit, with Benoit keeping the pace of the match. Kanyon makes his way down to the ring. Kanyon then attacks Benoit, but Benoit gets up, hits a diving headbutt on DDP, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time still WCW United States Champion, is Chris Benoit. Hats off to Chris Benoit for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Sid Vicious versus Sting. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Sid Vicious and Sting, with Sting hitting a Stinger Splash on Sid Vicious in the corner. But Sid was trying to keep the pace of the match, and then Sid Vicious ultimately hits a devastating choke slam on Sting, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Sid Vicious. Hats off to Sid Vicious for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Goldberg versus Rick Steiner. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Goldberg and Steiner, with Goldberg keeping the pace of the match. Goldberg then hits a spear on Rick Steiner, and then Goldberg ultimately hits his signature jackhammer on Rick Steiner, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Goldberg. Hats off to Goldberg for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Randy Savage versus Dennis Rodman. I thought it was an okay matchup. Rodman quickly attacks Randy Savage. Rodman was trying to keep the pace of the match. George is here. George then hits Rodman with a weapon. Randy then goes for the cover, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Randy Savage. Hats off to Randy Savage for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WCW's Road Wild 1999. It is Kevin Nash versus Hulk Hogan for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. I thought it was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Nash and Hogan, with Nash keeping the pace of the match. Nash then hits a jackknife powerbomb on Hogan, but Hogan gets up, hits a leg drop on Nash, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new world champion, is Hulk Hogan. Couple things I'm going to say about Road Wild 1999 before I get out of here, man. Number one, this was a solid event from top to bottom. Always a big fan of the Road Wild pay-per-views. Usually 9 times out of 10, the Road Wild pay-per-views usually take place around Sturgis for Bike Week. And it was always a great event, man. It always got, the crowd invested into the pay-per-view. And the fact that the pay-per-view was usually 9 times out of 10 outside for the fans. It was always great to see, man, really. It got the fans invested into WCW. It got the fans excited. It got the wrestlers excited as well. And it was one of those pay-per-views that, every calendar year, it seemed like from 95 leading up to 2001, Road Wild was one of those pay-per-views that a lot of people anticipated because of the atmosphere where it was at. It was outside. It was easy for fans to watch the event. And it was just great, man. It really was. And it really made, it really set up WCW quite well, to be honest with you, because it got so many fans invested in the Road Wild and Hog Wild pay-per-views, to be honest with you. So, all in all, it was a great pay-per-view. A couple matches on this card that I actually did enjoy. Number one, the opening matchup, Mysterio teaming up with Kidman and Guerrero versus Vampiro, Shaggy 2-Dope, and Violent J. Solid matchup from top to bottom. Canyon and Bigelow teaming up against Harlem Heat for the WCW Tag Team Championship. Solid match with Harlem Heat becoming victorious in that match, and at that time becoming the new WCW Tag Team Champions. Some matches on here I could have done without. Ernest Miller and Bagwell, again, very lackadaisical match. DDP versus Chris Benoit, again, solid matchup from top to bottom. Sid Vicious and Sting was a solid matchup as well, but it all came down to the main event. Kevin Nash versus Hulk Hogan for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. It was all about the main event. This was the first match, I believe, that we got the old red and yellow Hulk Hogan and not the NWO Hulk Hogan, so a lot of fans were anticipating that. And a lot of people were waiting for Hulk Hogan to go back to the red and yellow Hulk Hogan rather than the black and white NWO Hulk Hogan. So a lot of people, that night were anticipating that, especially in the main event. So, but all in all, solid event from top to bottom. But with that being said, just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, you guys know by now, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of a 10. 1 being the absolute worst, 10 being the absolute best. I'm going to have to give WCW's Road Wild 1999 a solid rating of a 5, 5.5 at best. But this is my review of WCW's Road Wild 1999. I hope you guys are out there staying safe, be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.